PC enthusiasts argue about some really stupid things. Intel versus AMD, GeForce versus Radeon, that kind of stuff. But one of the dumbest is probably which thermal paste is best. Now, thermal paste is the gunky substance that sits between your processor die on your CPU or GPU and whatever gigantic aftermarket cooler you slapped on there because it came with an RGB fan. Anyway, the reason that this was always a dumb argument was because until recently, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of difference between them, a couple degrees centigrade at most. However, lately that has changed. This here is called Thermal Grizzly Conductonaut, a liquid metal thermal paste. Now, what makes Conductonaut different from other kind of thermal compounds? Well, as I said, it's made of metal. Most other pastes are some kind of ceramic compound that works okay, but it really has nothing on this stuff. The downside of this, and oh boy is there a downside, is that if you get this stuff on anything other than the die in the cooler, the PCB, the resistors, or any kind of circuit on that board, you can essentially kiss your piece of hardware goodbye. Conductonaut is, well, electrically conductive. Having it on anything that has power run through it is the fastest way to destroy your electronics, but it gets even worse. Not only do you have to worry about shorting out your shiny new GPU if you put it on there, but it cannot be used if you have an aluminum cooler. The mixture of gallium and whatever else is in there will actually eat through your cooler if it's an aluminum one, so it is copper only, I'm afraid. So, do I end up burning up a perfectly good GPU? Let's find out. The first thing we have to do is establish our baseline measurements. As you can see, we're hitting about 47 degrees Celsius on 28% fan speed with the auto fan curve, and we level out at about 71C and 52% fan speed under a Furmark load. Next, we have to remove the heatsink and clean off the old thermal paste from both the chip and the copper slug on the heatsink. And finally, we're ready to apply our liquid metal. Now, with normal thermal paste, you would apply a tiny bit onto the die itself and let the pressure of the heatsink being screwed down spread the compound on the chip. However, to be as safe as possible, we're going to apply a little bit into a bowl and use one of the included cotton swabs to transfer and spread it around the die until it's completely covered, but not pulled up. So, all that's left is to reassemble the card, pop it into the PC, pray it works, yes, and enjoy the glorious temperatures that liquid metal give. Wait, that's not nearly what I was expecting. A single degree and a 4% fan speed drop, all for risking the life of my electronics? But wait. What if we aren't seeing noticeable drops in temperature because we weren't constrained by temperatures in the first place? I mean, 71C is hardly danger territory for any GPU. What if we tried using Thermal Grizzly on something that is constrained by thermals? Something like a laptop? This is my Eurocom M3 that I've been using as my daily driver until about a month ago. It sports a quad-core Haswell i7 and a Maxwell 860M. Solid specs for a laptop that I bought in 2015. And as you can see, after about 5 minutes of IDA64 load, we're seeing temperatures in the high 90s and some significant thermal throttling on the CPU, and the GPU is hovering about in the mid 80s under load. Now, this is probably going to be even more dangerous this time, because this time, if we mess up, we puff an entire laptop, not just some old GPU from 2011. So, this time I'm taking extra precautions. After taking off the heatsink and cleaning off the i7 and 860M dies on the laptop, before putting on the liquid metal, I added strips of electrical tape around the CPU die in the event of a spill. However, you can't just use any old electrical tape you have lying around. This one's rated for temps up to 105 degrees Celsius, which is plenty because the maximum temperatures that Intel CPUs will generate is 100 degrees Celsius before they thermal throttle. So again, we put a tiny bit of liquid metal into the dish. This amount will easily do both the CPU and the GPU. And after smearing a very thin layer on both dies, we again wipe the remainder onto the copper heat sinks. So, moment of truth time. Did I ruin a $1,000 laptop? Success! So, it boots, but that's all we know it does so far. How does it perform? Last time we only saw a 1 degree difference drop, so let's see how well this laptop handles IDA 64, and holy crap, that is a solid 5 degrees Celsius difference and no thermal throttling at all. Now that's more what I was looking for. And keep in mind, this is the difference between a pretty good thermal compound in Arctic Silver 5 and liquid metal. The delta between liquid metal and whatever garbage compound comes stock would be much higher. And there's this too. Notice how now there is 0 thermal throttling, even under a sustained heavy load like IDA. That means that we would likely see real-world benefits in long, heavy workloads like rendering video, since the CPU should be able to sustain higher turbo clocks for longer. Of course, I wasn't really expecting such a dramatic result, so I was unable to test this hypothesis by doing a before rendering of a video. As for GPU temps, we're looking at a solid 3 degrees Celsius drop. Solid, but then again, this is in comparison to a good thermal paste. Also, you may be wondering why I used a different GPU stress test from the before test, and the reason is, well, Furmark damn near broke my laptop. During the testing, my laptop shut itself down while I was running it, and I had to power cycle it by removing the battery in the CMOS battery. Well, that's it. Thermal Grizzly Conductonaut works, and it works well. This statement comes with an asterisk, though. You aren't going to see huge differences if you aren't already having issues with heat, as you saw with the old 6850. But boy, if you are, it can make a night and day difference. Now, would I recommend using liquid metal as a thermal paste? Well, it depends. If you're using it in a desktop that doesn't move around much and you're confident in your ability to apply it without destroying components, go for it. However, if you're using it in a laptop and you're like me and travel around a lot, I would have my reservations. This may be just being paranoid, but I would be worried about jostling and moving around, disrupting some of the liquid metal in the laptop and it getting onto the motherboard. Theoretically, if you do it right, this should not be a concern at all, but it's still something that I would be wary of.